comments, but we will give some time now to our other two panellists, perhaps from where they are, to respond to what Sophie has shared and also what Senator Dean Smith shared through David Flint.
Good. Thank you, Guy. I fully support everything that Sophie York has presented in her talk, so I have no arguments with you, and support the proposition of a referendum instead of a plebiscite. I am concerned about Senator Dean Smith's proposition that he put to us in his absence, that was read to you, where he was promoting the primacy of the Parliament. I'm all in favour of the primacy of the Parliament, but there has to be certain principles that are followed by the Parliament. If the Labor Party had won the election, and they only lost the election by one seat, the Labor leader, Mr Shorten, had promised same-sex marriage would be legal within 100 days. It would be now legal. In other words, the party that could have won the election would have put through the legislation in the federal parliament without a free vote. They had decided that the party position is in favour of same-sex marriage. And that's why a number of prominent Labor leaders who are Catholics, strongly opposing same-sex marriage, have now all announced they're in favour of same-sex marriage. Because if that legislation was put to Parliament by a Labor government and they didn't vote for it, and it was Labor Party policy, they would automatically be expelled from the Labor Party and no longer be in the positions that they hold now. So that's a tragedy that has occurred. So we are facing a situation where the Labor Party was not going to give a free vote to their members, and if they won the election they would have had the majority of the House Representatives, and from what we know of the Senate, a number of the minor parties, particularly the Greens, are very strongly in favour of the same-sex marriage proposition. So I don't think it would have been blocked in the Senate. So I'm all in favour of the primacy of the Parliament, but let the Parliament have free votes without trying to restrict the conscience of each member.
And Rikki, would you like to make a comment, either in your own capacity or from Senator Day?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you to the Honourable Reverend Nile for hosting us here today. I also acknowledge Senator Burstyn here from One Nation Party, New South Wales. I'm sorry if I miss anyone else who's in the audience. Just a couple of quick comments by way of introduction. I'm the Chief of Staff for Senator Day, as you said. He apologises he can't be with you today. Strong supporter of the constitutional monarchy, as is our party. But as you might know if you've read the press, he's under considerable pressure at the moment. And I see men of the cloth beside me and in front of me. Please remember him in your prayers, all of you, if you're people of prayer, because he certainly needs them right now. There's a public crucifixion going on, in effect, with our senator. On the question of marriage, Family First is resolutely in support of the traditional definition of marriage, as is Fred's party and a number of others. And I would only say, by way of comment, Sophie's presentation was excellent. Agree with that. Our preference as a party is for a referendum, as Fred has also said, because, and that would, I think, appease the conscience of Senator Smith, because it would be the proper mechanism to resolve the question. But we have a situation now where a plebiscite was put, as Sophie has excellently covered, by the coalition at the last election, and that is the battleground that we are now on, and our view is that we have to stand by the plebiscite and have it for the reasons others have outlined. Far rather cover other points in answers to question.
Good, thank you. Now, we will circulate the microphone in a moment. I might just ask Will, who's our very kind volunteer today, a recent graduate from the university, to take the microphone from me. But while the microphone is being circulated, I have a quick question that I'd like to put. The question that I'd like to put is to share, which I'm sure that many would be reflecting on, the thoughts of Edmund Burke, who said in his speech to the electors of Bristol in 1774 that your representative owes you not only his industry but also his judgment, and he betrays you if instead of serving you he sacrifices that to your opinion. So that was his thoughts around representative democracy. And I know that Sophie has shared a few thoughts already on the way that the Parliament is selected at the moment, but does either Sophie wanted to expand on that, or if any of the other panellists wanted to share any thoughts around why this shouldn't be dealt with by the elected politicians if they owe us as Burkes or their opinions and not just their industry.
Well, just a quick comment. I've already made the point that our parliaments no longer act in the way they originally were intended to, where each member would represent their electorate and there'd be a free vote. Now we're seeing the party laying down the political position that members must adhere to. I see this happening every day in the state parliament, where Labor members come to me and complain about some proposition and say, I have no choice, Fred, I have to vote for this. If I don't, I will automatically expel myself from the Labor Party. And that's a common occurrence, that I have these members, Labor members, come to me, and one or two have said, I've had enough of this, I'm resigning from the Parliament. And they were quite prominent Labor leaders, resigned from the Parliament. So it's a tragedy what's happened to our democracy. That's a reality. That there's no free votes in the Parliament, and that's why I believe the people must decide on an issue which is so basic and so fundamental to the foundation of our society, that the people decide, and it should ideally be a referendum with the yes case and the no case both paid for by the Commonwealth, which is what they would do in the plebiscite, but a referendum would be binding and also would require authorised statements to be issued in favour of each of the propositions, a yes vote and a no vote, so that every person in Australia would have information in which they could then make a careful judgment whether they want to vote for it or against it. I think with those conditions, I would strongly support a referendum. But obviously, we're a long way from a referendum, and you may be aware, many of the parties have announced that they totally oppose the plebiscite. As far as I can see, the Labor Party opposes the plebiscite, and so it's very unlikely the plebiscite will be passed by the Senate. It will be passed by the House of Representatives, where the government has a one-seat majority, but they cannot force it through the Senate. That's a current situation, and so we are, in a sense, in limbo. We may have nothing. We may not even have a plebiscite.
Rikki, do you have any thoughts?
Jai, just to go to your question, it should be borne in mind that when federal parliamentarians were asked to go and actually do their job and speak to their electorates about the marriage question, a majority of them came back that their electorate's view was no. So it's not only the role of the convictions of members of parliament that they are elected for their judgment, but to actually listen to their electors, who in a great many cases do not support marriage being redefined as an electorate body. I guess my point is they are out of touch with their own electorates. I could go on for some time just about some of the parallels we saw during the Republic debate. I was a younger man then, and even during the Brexit debate recently, about overblown commentary and experts saying it was done and dusted, even experts writing off Donald Trump at the moment. They may end up with eggs on their face. So I think that what we need to look at is politicians who are driven by public opinion and the media who are in their ear all the time, and actually look at what the electors believe.
So just to quickly follow up on that question, do you take the view, if Senator Day has a view on this, that the parliamentarians should be reflecting the views of their electorate, or do you take the position, as Burke suggested, that they should be, especially on matters that weren't relevant at the time of an election, that they should be reflecting not the views of the electorate but their opinion?
So I didn't mean to cast confusion. We absolutely subscribe to the view of Burke. My point was that even those who don't subscribe to the view of Burke should listen to their electors, and I think they if that's their view, they should actually be doing what their electors want them to do.
Thank you. Now, who has a question? I'm sure there'll be many. While the microphone is travelling to the back, we'll just get a quick comment from the panel as well, since the question of the yes-no booklet was raised. So if this was to be dealt with through the mechanism of a referendum, there would be a yes-no booklet, certainly under the current Machineries Act, that would be given to every elector. In the recent past, with the local councils matter, there was a suggestion that the funding be given on the basis of the vote within the Parliament. Do you believe that if it were to go down that path, that there should be equal funding given to both sides, or how should that be dealt with?
Well, I support funding for both sides, equal funding, and I think that was what the government promised. I think 7.5 million, I think it is, for each side of the debate.
I've been present in meetings with the Attorney-General and Special Minister Ryan regarding this matter and putting the point that there should be equal funding from a Family First point of view for both sides. And I just feel like I have to say Mr Shorten's comments about what that might represent are just appalling and really doesn't put much trust in the Australian people and their decency.
Can I just address that expense and harm argument? That's what's being put forward as a reason why the ALP and the Greens won't support a people's vote. Now, if you unpack that, they say that the expense is 160 million. Well, the AEC website said that the recent federal election, which was it was a double dissolution election, and it ran for weeks of counting very complicated preferences. They said that it was 135 million. So this 160 million to me sounds like a very upper limit estimate for a very simple question. It's not a complicated election. The other thing is that we had a plebiscite for our national song. I mean, we're talking about our social infrastructure. Marriage is a very important issue. I just don't think that cuts any weight, that expense argument. And the other thing is that it sounds to me as though their real concern, I'll deal with the harm one as well. Now, they're saying that it harms people's mental health if this issue is debated. Now, the Irish have just been through this last year. Tiernan Brady, who ran apparently the campaign over there, got off the plane and said, it's perfectly fine to have a civil debate. We were able to have one in Ireland. We're pretty passionate people in Ireland. We were able to have one, and they went, shh, shh, shh. We're not running that here. We're running that it's harmful. And he's like, okay. So you won't hear anything from him on that issue anymore. So to my mind, it has no credibility. And the other thing is that they're only airing the harm argument where it affects the LGBTIQ part of the activist debate. Now, there are gay people who actually do not want the marriage definition changed. They had a mother and father who was married. They very much treasured that, and they are in contact with me about that. And they don't want to be lumped in with that as though they're too fragile and flaky to have a debate about an important matter in the democracy. They think that, actually, to say that causes harm, because it winds back all the gains that they have made to be considered and respected in society.
So we'll take the question from the lady.
My name's Annette. I just want to ask, how do we ensure that a referendum is held? Can we legally enforce it?
Okay, let's. Whoever wants to comment on that, we might keep the responses to about 30 seconds so that we can move to other questions. Let's line up the next question as well. Over there, John Stone. John, just put your hand up so Will can see you. Okay, if the panel would like to respond to the previous question.
Well, the first one, we'd have to lobby both the major parties to support a referendum, and both of them are reluctant to do that. But it can be done through petitions. If there are thousands of petitions signed by all the Australians calling for a referendum, then surely the major parties should respect that.
Anybody else want to add to that? The question was, is there a legal way that people can force a referendum?
I can take that.
Okay, let's hope.
If the legislation is enacted, arguably you would have a test case that it's not valid under the Constitution. So even if the law is changed...
Sophie, would you move the mic closer?
Oh, sorry. So you asked if there was a legal way that we could compel or trigger a referendum. One method I'm thinking is, but this is the long method, is to actually, if Parliament does enact same-sex legislation, to actually challenge it and say that it's unconstitutional. But, I mean, the petition might be a better way of doing it.
I would just say that really that would be ideal, but we have, as you referred to, Sophie, the ACT and Commonwealth case where the current High Court has made a ruling that it is possible to do so. So it really is a matter of mobilising and convincing parties, as Reverend Nile said, to change their party platforms.
Good. John Stone.
I want to come back to the famous quote from Edmund Burke, because I think what people always overlook when they use that quote, they're wrenching it totally out of context. Edmund Burke's electors consisted of about 12 people. They were all representing rotten boroughs. I think the rotten borough of Old Sarum, which is just outside Salisbury, actually did have 12 electors, and most of them had no more than 30. And on the day the vote was not by secret ballot; it was by open show of hands. So it was entirely subject to the pressures imposed by the landlord, who usually owned the rotten borough. I mean, it's ridiculous to suggest that Burke was, when he said Burke was right in saying he should not represent the views, well, not necessarily rather represent the views of those people who elected him, because they were themselves just ciphers in some political process. They were not, in any sense, electorate such as we have today, because the franchise, there was virtually no franchise of any significant kind at that time. We're talking about the late 18th century. We didn't even get the first reform bill in Britain until 1832, which gave 10 pound householders the vote.
Well, that's an interesting comment. Thank you, John. Does anyone in the I think that was directed to me, but does anyone in the panel have a comment against that before we move on? And then we'll take Max Willis's question.
I'll just say I defer to the judgment of Mr. Stone, who's been a regular visitor to our office, has got great experience in these matters.
That's right. I wouldn't dare challenge the comment from John
Following
Stone.
on what John Stone just said, if memory serves me correct, Edmund Burke lost his seat at the next election. I haven't finished yet. I'm not entering into the issue of the merits of same-sex marriage or otherwise, but I think the real issue in this discussion for Australians for constitutional monarchy is the one raised in the message delivered from the Senator in Canberra, and that is or is not the Australian Constitution as it currently is damaged or improved by the use of plebiscites, which are non-binding on the Parliament? That, I think, is the real issue of this discussion.
We'll take that.
I'd like to hear what the panel has to say on that.
Just before the panel does make comment, in light to ACM's position on this, it's more on the, as you say, not the substance but the mechanics, and to explore it with the panel. So ACM takes no position on the issue itself. But you were directing that to ACM as well.
Well, I accept the preposition that was put by Senator Smith that, and if I could paraphrase it perhaps, we may open Pandora's box in having plebiscites on issues that should be dealt with in the Parliament. That's why I think all of us in this panel have said it would be preferable to deal with the matter by way of referendum. But as I said in my contribution, the Coalition have given us a policy situation that we now have, and we are on the battleground that we have to face at this time. Now, and because of the activism of the High Court in relation to this matter, because of, as Sophie York pointed out, the weaponising of rights legislation to attack people of good conscience on this matter, we have to deal with this situation in the best way possible. So, look, the plebiscite is by no means a desirable outcome, but at the moment that is the policy we have to vote on in the Parliament thanks to the Coalition.
Therefore, we need to put pressure on the Coalition to reject the plebiscite and to adopt a referendum to amend the Marriage Act so we can see exactly what the proposition is. And
We do.
The voters would know what they're voting for.
We do need to bring this session to an end because the next one is to commence, but may we extend it by 5 more minutes, David, to have 2 more questions with a very brief response. Okay, Alan Metcalf, and then the last one will be from Eddie Selwyn.
Thank you. Listening to the earlier speaker on the Constitution and listening to Sophie, my question is, to me it appears the big issue is how do we get the message across to the people? In both situations, in all of the problems that I see that we the people have, is that our voice is not being heard, right? We can talk about changing legislation, but if we don't have the support of the people, I don't understand how you expect to win. The gentleman on the end brought our attention to what's happening to Donald Trump in America. If you're not watching that and learning from it, you're really not interested in succeeding as legislators, right? I'd like the panel, just for my curiosity, to explain how we're going to get our message across to the people, because
Okay, we'll take that as the question because we
haven't done a very good
we'll leave that
job
there.
for a long, long time.
Okay, so the question
we
is
would
how we
have to
communicate.
campaign for the no vote as if it was a federal election, and that is print publicity, man every polling booth, visit every home, and mobilise the Australian people in the same way as we did for the vote on the Republic. And I believe if we do the same strategy, we would win the vote on same-sex so-called marriage.
Any other comments to that, perhaps in particular to the mediums that we may use?
Yeah, a couple of points. First of all, it falls, I think, on us who hold a strong view on this matter to take an educative role, to educate the younger generation about the value of these propositions, and to have politicians and spokespeople who are bold enough to take their lashes in the media on this. We need to meet the debate on the media battleground.
Good. Okay, well, we'll leave that there unless you desperately want to add something, Sophie.
This is why the ALP have opposed a people's vote. They don't want the public education. They want them to remain, as John Podesta would put it, compliant and unaware.
Okay, last question from Eddie Selwyn.
Sophie, I'd like to thank you for talking about the referendum, because I was quite happy with the plebiscite, but your views of the referendum have made me change my mind. Could we have a Swiss-style model where the government goes to the people every week on some issue?
That in fact, is one of the issues that will be explored in the final session today, Eddie, so we might leave that till there where we explore it in greater detail. Well, thank you very much to our panel. Let's give them a round of applause. And on that point, I'll pass over to Ken Handley, the Honourable Ken Handley, who will be chairing the great debate.